I'm going to talk about scheme delusions. And what I mean by scheme delusions is that I start, for whatever reason, thinking that a situation isn't what the situation actually is, and people or hidden people have intentions or a scheme for that situation that I'm in. And that can present itself maybe to a really extreme level, thinking that people are organizing something to harm me, or it can happen at a really low level and a seemingly benevolent level where people are trying to orchestrate a safe environment for me to be because for some reason I'm suffering from something that I don't know about. Like um, one time, for example, I had this experience where I was starting a new job and I just got over my so this was relatively when I was young, but it was probably one that cost me my job the quickest. That I was going to work for another call center because they were easy jobs to get, and they had high turnover rates, etc. And I started to believe while I was there, I had this feeling something wasn't quite right. And people were really nice to me. And I started trying to figure out why they were really nice to me. And my brain, my delusional way of thinking, which I wasn't aware of at that time, how it really worked, that started to think, well, oh, maybe I'm autistic and I don't know I'm autistic. And so everybody else knows I'm autistic. And so they're setting up this work environment to deal with me who has autism. And in that experience, I started for my first enrollment day. And as that was building, I was noticing that I didn't like it. I felt insanely guilty and I felt like I was burdening other people. And an example of how that really like demonstrates itself is like, say I was part of the work thing, we were given a little bit of a competition to see who could do a good pitch. And I did a good pitch and everyone was like, oh, that was amazing, dude, like great. And then I sat down and I'm like, oh, they're only saying that because, I have autism and they're putting on this show for that because they are trying to appease me. And then this other guy does his and he doesn't get the same reaction. And then I'm like, oh, now I feel really bad because I've taken that attention from him, but they don't want to give him more attention. And so it starts, like, the delusion starts creating its own emotional systems. And what's really difficult about that is that then the emotional systems that are activating, guilt, shame, and all this stuff through that delusional world I'm building start to make me act in ways then that aren't necessarily good ways for other people to respond to. And then I think what made that worse is as the training progressed, I probably started going quieter and shutting down. I used to have a lot of problems speaking because there's this secret world that's going on and I don't want to say the wrong thing. And so I would stutter and stammer and try to say the right thing within that realm of delusion. And so then people do start treating me as though there is something wrong with me, I suppose, which then further excites that delusion that I'm autistic and it's all been orchestrated. And so the time comes that I finally get out of training, and this delusion's been persisting the whole time. And I'm really nervous, and I'm trying to go on the phone, and they get someone to help me, which makes it, it's amazing to them really because they were really doing their job well. But then they were getting someone to help me, and I was feeling more like, oh my god, there's something really wrong with me. What if it's not autism, or what if it is like a severe form of autism? And started thinking about myself, about what if I'm in some way brain damaged. And the mind goes really crazy with these delusions if you don't know how to rein it in. And so I ended up passing my training, god knows how actually, with what I was thinking about and all that sort of stuff. And at the time as well, I was homeless, so that wasn't it wasn't I always paranoid that I smelt, and that added to the delusion as well. And anyway, I passed the training and I get my first week on the phones. Now it's high stress. You get about 200 calls a day. And so I would start seeing all the secret codes and the messages. And this delusion turned from something quite benign about autism into someone outside of this place is trying to communicate with me because they see that this is a simulation tank for autism and that it's not right. It's an experiment. And that got really bad. And when I get stressed, it makes the symptoms of psychosis worse. And so I was starting to read more codes if you see my other videos, I was engaging more of that subconscious narrative underlay to try to make sense of my experience. And then I'm hearing voices now, because this is usually what would happen, is that the more stress that happens to me, the more voices I would hear. And so it's getting to about the end of that week, and I hear, like, as clear as day, what causes your autism, like as if someone said it in my ear. And I just remember ripping my headset off, throwing my headset on the table, and looking around to see if anyone had said that to me. And then I can't remember, because this is one of the hardest things about the condition, is that things are so blurry. And because you're thinking in such a desperate way, which contributes to the building of these delusions in like a really negative way, I just don't remember much of it. But I can't remember if it was the same day or if it was the next day, and the symptoms continued. Oh, I remember. I believe that was the time when I went home after that distress-induced period. I went home and I was in my room, and that's when it must have been during that time period, I had the hallucination that someone was outside my window in the street going, "You have schizophrenia, you have schizophrenia." And it was like as clear as day that they were chanting. And so I went out of my house and I tried to follow that voice all the way around this road, and I couldn't find that voice. And I went back into work it was the next day, or maybe a couple of days later of going back into work. I just crumbled from the stress again, and I walked into the office where this person was. It was a really nice person. I said, "I can't work here, unfortunately, I have to quit." I gave them a silly reason saying, "Oh, I'm going to be moving away. I just can't work here. I've got a really bad problem going on. I can't talk about it. I'm going to have to leave." And I felt very guilty for that. That's actually the reason that I went to get treatment, but I didn't last long on the treatment. That's in my story. It's because I was actually given a place to live during this process. I wasn't homeless at the time. No, that was the other job. Sorry, I wasn't homeless at the time. I'd been given a place to stay. I'd just been homeless. There was an overlay like this because I'd just got this job. No, sorry. So I had just got this job, and during the training, I was still homeless. And then because I was offered a room by someone from the local pub, an old man, and I wanted to make sure I could afford to pay him rent so that I wasn't late on paying rent. So I got the job in the call center, but I was still homeless during the training. And then I moved into that room when I knew I was going to be getting my first set of wages, so that I didn't, owe him any money or anything. But this is one of the examples. It's so confusing to try and make sense of this stuff. But anyway, I quit the job, and I then went to try and get help, which went worse, and that probably had a worse effect on my mental health, trying to get help, because the doctors weren't equipped, I don't think, to deal with me and the way that my illness was manifesting, which is, again, what I've talked about in the schemes kind of delusions. Because the human mind is so expansive, and you'll hear me talk about this all the time, but there is more synaptic potential in connection variation in the brain than there are subatomic particles in the visible universe. This means that every single person that you come across is just like an infinite universe in their own right. And with psychoses, because the mind is taking full advantage of that full variation in possible synaptic connections, when therapists are approaching people with psychoses, their current method of approaching people it's really incorrect, because they're already trying to put you in a diagnostic box, but the expression of the illness isn't, you cannot diagnose it by its nature. It's something which needs an incredibly advanced form of therapy we don't have yet. And that's why they rely on the medications to help control the symptoms, because we don't know much about the condition or its expression. But yeah, to conclude the video, scheme delusions are when you believe that people have ulterior motives where you don't necessarily have the proof in reality, but then through the fear of the scheme type delusions, you then start getting emotional systems which give you more proof and signs that something's not right in your environment. So it really does, you hear people talk about it all the time, it really does become a spiral, because you start perceiving things incorrectly, Then you start behaving things incorrectly because perception determines your behavior a lot of the time, and then your negative behavior worsens your environment or the actions of others in your environment, which then further alters your perception, and it just becomes this rabbit hole, which is very difficult for people to try and get out of, because once your emotional systems are activating, they're the things that are dragging you down. And it's really important to remember that, yes, our emotions are very important, but from my experience with psychoses, emotions are very, very destabilizing things. So the way to experience emotions when you've got psychoses or schizophrenia is just to feel them. And I know that sounds insane to say, but I just feel my emotions. So when I get, say, a negative feeling overwhelm me, or even anger, I'll just allow it to fade out naturally. I won't try to build up thoughts on it, because of the amount of times where I've felt something, maybe through faulty perception, or maybe something actually is a trigger. And then on that emotional state, I will build thoughts up, which then change my emotional perceptions. You can't think constructively while you're emotional. Emotions are meant to be felt, they're not meant to be explained, right? We're supposed to be able to empathize. That's what empathy is. You see someone who's angry or upset, you don't talk to them, you just sit and feel that emotion with them, right? That's why we have mirror neurons that allow for that activation of empathy. But we have too many regions of the brains that are primal and set up to see negativity patterns and patterns of agents of threat or agents of ulterior motive. And so when your emotions take hold, they take hold of those systems too, and we piece together reality in a negative way. But I went on a bit of a rant at the end of that video. I should really just save that for my delusional mechanism series. But yeah, that's the video of today. Have a good day.